4 Russian journalists, including 2 who have worked for DW, have been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for alleged extremism. They were convicted of working for a banned non-profit organisation set up by the deceased opposition leader Alexei Navalny. They deny the allegations. Their jailing is part of a widespread crackdown on dissent by Vladimir Putin. Authorities have taken aim at members of the opposition, independent journalists and ordinary citizens critical of the Kremlin.
They reported from Russian courtrooms. Now the cameras are turned on them. Applauded by supporters, these 4 journalists were seen together in a Moscow court at the start of their trial in October 2024. The charges being part of an extremist group. The prosecutor alleged they helped film videos for the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which was set up by the late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. They denied the accusations. Antonina Favorskaya and Artem Krieger have worked for the Russian independent outlet Sota Vision. Sergei Karelin is a videographer and Konstantin Gabov a journalist and producer. Both have worked in Russia for international outlets, including Deutsche Welle.
They are being persecuted for their journalistic activities, which is a reason to consider them political prisoners. Dissemination of any information that does not correspond to the state narrative, the narrative of state propaganda, is perceived as dangerous. In this sense, journalists are at great risk.
The trial itself is being held behind closed doors.
How are they coping?
Smiling. At first they were a little lost, but now they're fine. They're still trying to understand what is happening.
Last Thursday, the 4 journalists delivered their final statements before the court.
Even behind bars, I am convinced that one should report on Russia from Russia. To work in these extreme circumstances is difficult, but possible. Moreover, it is necessary. We need to show that there are people in Russia who think differently.
Gabov worked for DW as a correspondent in Moscow in 2019, and later, until his arrest, as a producer for international news agencies like Reuters.
If the court finds me guilty, my whole family will be punished as well. My 101-year-old grandfather, my elderly parents, and above all, my beautiful daughter. I never thought that my child would become a victim of political repression.
Karelin freelanced with Deutsche Welle for several years before Russia shut down DW's Moscow bureau in 2022.
I'm absolutely sure that they both were and remain devoted to their profession, journalism. They are honest, incorruptible and highly professional journalists. The fact that they were arrested says that it is impossible to work honestly, incorruptibly, openly, while observing journalistic rules and ethics. Everything that is the basis of our work.
The trial of these journalists is just another step in Russia's crackdown on free speech.
You saw DW's Riga bureau chief Yuri Reshetto in that report. He worked with 2 of the 4 jailed journalists in Moscow before Russia banned us from reporting from Moscow and joins us now from Riga. Welcome, Yuri. What should we make of these sentences?
Well, look, Phil, anyone who knows how consequently the situation of press freedom in Russia has worsened in recent years is hardly surprised. The charge of having worked with an extremist organization is very serious in Russia. This is exactly what the journalists were accused of. The Navalny Foundation, or Anti-Corruption Foundation, for which they allegedly worked, is considered extremist in Russia, and anything that has anything to do with the now-dead opposition politician Alexei Navalny is considered a red rag, so to speak, by the Russian authorities. The harsh verdict today is intended to have a maximum signal effect, a warning to all those who still continues to work with the Navalny Foundation, which is still operating from abroad.
And I understand you've been in contact with 2 of those journalists, Konstantin Gabov and Sergei Karelin, since they were detained in June. What have they been telling you?
Well, many colleagues have been writing to the four journalists and to both you mentioned, Gabov and Karelin, for over the last months. Many have supported them with letters, me included, even though all letters have been censored by the authorities in prison. In their letters, both Konstantin and Sergei tried to me to stay optimistic and not to lose sense of humor. They remembered their work as reporters for DW in Moscow. But of course, such punishments are now a very hard blow for them. In their final statements, we read it now to the court, all four journalists denied their guilt. Some, like Sergei Karelin, got personal. In his final statement, he spoke of his young daughter, for whom he was not just a loving father, but a great storyteller, he said, who used to travel around the world and tell her stories about this world. Konstantin Gabov underlined in his final statement how important is reporting on Russia from Russia.
The environment there, the media environment there for journalists has always been oppressive. Has the war in Ukraine made things worse?
Yes, absolutely. There has been, no freedom of the press in Russia for years, and the situation has changed dramatically, I would say, since the beginning of the Russian war in Ukraine. Nowadays, any critical remark regarding the so-called special military operation, that's how this war is called in Russia, can be punished with draconian penalties. There are various sanctions for different so-called criminal offenses, from fines for so-called discrediting the Russian army to long prison sentences for allegedly false information about the Russian army. Even the simple phrase, "no to war," is now considered discrediting, and if someone says it publicly rather than quietly in their kitchen. In this respect, yes, the situation has changed dramatically. However, there are still courageous journalists in Russia who work mostly in small regional media and expose problems like corruption in Russia. A war doesn't play a central role in Russian reporting, and honest, open and critical reporting on war is simply dangerous and ultimately only possible from abroad.
OK, thanks for that, Yuri. Yuri Resheta in Riga.